Okay, tonight we're going to talk about the Supremes, and not necessarily the one with Diana Ross. Whoops. Okay, tonight we're going to talk about the Supremes, and not necessarily the one that has Diana Ross in it. Now, as you all know, President Trump put forth his first pick for this second position he's going to be filling on the Supreme Court. Now, everybody's got their opinions as to what this should be. And here's a couple of thoughts that I have before I get into it any further. I think it's very important that this person be able to excel in written communications. Now, I know that the opinions that they write have to have the proper legal terminology, but I also want them to write these opinions to be clear, concise, and easy to understand. Don't try and impress us with your intense legal knowledge by using a whole bunch of terms we don't know. Make it simple and easy to understand so that we can clearly grasp why you've made this decision. Now, everybody is going back and forth. According to the liberals, this is the most extreme pick that they've ever seen in the world. The conservatives think the pick's okay. The never-Trumpers wouldn't like any pick he picked, no matter what, so we'll just leave them out. And all the people in between, it goes back and forth depending on who you're talking to. First of all, I don't really like labels, but if I were to choose a label, I would say I want this person to be a constitutionalist. Now, sometimes these definitions become a little bit unclear depending on who the person is and what their understanding is. Constitutionalism is the idea which has often been associated with the political theories of John Locke and the founders of the American Republic, that the government can and should be legally limited in its power, and that the authority or legitimacy depends on observing these limitations. Now, I think it's important to understand that our founding fathers understood that there should be limitations to the government, because it seems like nowadays those in the swamp feel that every issue, every problem should have a solution that includes the government, and I don't think we necessarily need that. Now, as the questioning begins for Justice Kavanaugh, you're going to be able to tell which direction the senators are going without even seeing if there's an R or a D beside their name. And that'll be easy to tell because their direct inquiries will show what positions they are protecting and the slant that they have. For example, a pro-life question might be, do you feel that life begins at conception? A pro-choice question might be, do you feel a woman has a right to control her own body? So as you're watching the hearings, kind of keep that in mind, and you'll be able to see which way that person is going and what desired position they have, whether they're trying to make the candidate look good with their position or making the candidate look bad with their position. Now, one of the things people don't realize is SCOTUS was never intended to make laws. It was only intended to determine if the laws that were made were within the framework of the Constitution. The Supreme Court has a special role to play in the United States system of government. The Constitution gives it the power to check, if necessary, the actions of the President and Congress. It can tell a President that his actions are not allowed by the Constitution. It can tell the Congress that a law it passed has violated the U.S. Constitution and therefore is no longer a law. It can also tell the government of a state that one of its laws breaks the rule of the Constitution. Nowhere in these powers does it say that they can create new laws or that they can adjust or change laws. Now, we all know that the liberals would like a living, flowing Constitution, which means they feel they should be able to change it to however they want, depending on the day and what their needs are. But that was never the intent of it. The Supreme Court is the final judge in all cases involving the laws of Congress and the highest law of all, the Constitution. The Supreme Court, however, is far from powerful. Its power is limited by its two other branches of government. The President nominates the justices to the court. The Senate must vote its approval of the nominations. The whole Congress also has a great power over the lower courts in the federal system. The districts and appeals courts are created by acts of Congress. These courts may be abolished by Congress if it wishes. The Supreme Court is like a referee on a football field. The Congress, the President, the state police, and other government officials are the players. Some can pass laws, others can enforce laws, but all exercise the power within certain boundaries. These boundaries are set by the Constitution as a referee in the United States system of government. It is the Supreme Court's job to say when the government officials have stepped out of bounds. So, does anybody have any questions about what I've spoke of so far?
Well, I know for a fact, Rush Limbaugh was talking today, and they're saying that they are going to rake this pick over the coals, as well as his family. I guess his mother's also a judge, and the liberals are just compiling page after page after page of crap that they can throw at him. So it's going to be really tough, not only for his parents, but he's got two young daughters as well. So I was just saying in the chat that it's going to be up to us, to all of us, to make as much positive noise as we possibly can in order to drown out all the negative crap that the liberals are going to throw at him.
That's a very good point. And another way that we can kind of help protect that is call your United States senators and voice your opinion about the pick. Now, unfortunately, we live in Virginia, and we've got probably two of the worst senators in the entire country. But we're still going to call them, and we're going to tell Timmy Kaine and Mark, I can't remember his last name, that they should vote to approve this pick because it's not an extreme pick, it's middle of the road, and it's someone who has the right credentials to be a Supreme Court justice.
Not only that, but little Timmy is up for election this year, so he's going to sway whichever way the wind blows.
No, I don't think he's going to go whichever way the wind blows. I think he's going to hold a hard line and protect his Democratic possibilities, because I don't think we've seen the last of Timmy Kaine. I think he's got aspirations to run for president someday. But now we're kind of drifting off on the subject, so let's get back to any questions that people might have about SCOTUS. Okay, hearing none, we'll go into the next part. A lot of people are concerned about whether, now that there'll be another conservative justice on the Supreme Court, if Brett Kavanaugh gets approved, whether SCOTUS will overturn a bunch of decisions that it has made in the past. It's pretty rare for them to do that, although in certain cases they have done it. The feeling that I get with the different opinions that I've read is I don't see the Supreme Court revisiting a lot of their decisions. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody can't bring something up in a different way, but remember, the the Supreme Court does not have to take every case that is petitioned to the court for making decisions. Now, one of the decisions that it had overturned is Pace versus Alabama. And this was a law dating back to 1883, and Alabama had a law against interracial marriage. And originally, the Supreme Court decided that this was not discrimination because it equally targeted blacks and whites. Now, how can a Supreme Court decision be changed? Well, let's put it in context. If the idea is that the court issues an opinion on Monday, July 2nd, 2018, is there anything that can be done about it if the parties or someone else doesn't like the results? Well, here's a couple things that people might not be aware of. A U.S. Supreme Court decision cannot be appealed or reviewed by any other court or other branch of government. The Supreme Court itself is the last word as to the specifics of the case before it. Now, the court can overturn itself. However, to do that, a new case that presents the same issue must make its way to court. Right now, the one that's concerning the left the most is the abortion issue, Roe versus Wade. Iowa had passed a law banning an abortion when the fetal heartbeat can be detected, which is at about 6 weeks. That case is making its way up the system, and pro-choice advocates fear that that will be presented to the Supreme Court, deciding if the Supreme Court decides to hear the case, which would then be an opportunity to overturn Roe versus Wade. I don't think the Supreme Court is going to want to touch this issue, even though they should. I think they'll just pass on it and just let it go on down the road. Now, depending on the issue, Congress can pass a new law or try to amend the Constitution, and assuming the President signs it, that would make a U.S. Supreme Court decision moot. For example, a pre-Civil War Supreme Court never overturned slavery. U.S. had a Civil War slavery abolished, and the law was what changed that, making all of the cases about the Civil War and slavery a moot point, because it didn't matter what the justices ruled at that point once the law was changed. Now, one of the most recent ones that people have been talking about, which has been a biggie for the conservatives and one that has kind of frightened the liberals, is the SCOTUS decision regarding the Colorado baker. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled 7-2, which people are calling a narrowly written opinion, which I will explain why that is actually true, in favor of the Colorado baker who refused to make the wedding cake for the gay couple. The reason that it's a narrowly written opinion is it doesn't grant business owners broad exceptions based on the personal views of religious groups, based on the religious groups had hoped for and civil rights groups had feared, and it even defends the rights of gay Americans. Now, what's kind of interesting about this is there's a couple of factors that people didn't really take into effect or didn't really talk about when this ruling came about. One of those things was it wasn't that the baker refused to sell the gay couple anything. It was he refused to use his artistic ability to create a cake that he felt went against his religious beliefs. Another thing that I didn't know till I started doing some research onto this is when the baker decided to refuse to make the couple's wedding cake, which was July of 2012, Colorado state law had not legalized gay marriage. So there wasn't really a leg for the gay couple to stand on as far as the baker having to make this cake. In fact, he even feared that if he did, it could be construed as going against the law. The reason that the Supreme Court did rule the way that it did was that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, which had reviewed the dispute between the baker and the would-be clients and favored the couple. Unfortunately, as the record shows, some of the commissioners at the commission's formal public hearing endorsed the view that religious beliefs cannot be legitimately be carried into the public sphere or commercial domain, disparaging Philip's faith as despicable and characterized it as merely rhetorical, and compared his invocation of his sincerely religious beliefs to the defenses of slavery and the Holocaust. No commissioners objected to the comments, nor were they mentioned in the latter state court's ruling or disavowed in the briefs that were filed in Colorado. The comments thus cast doubt upon the fairness and impartiality of the commission's adjudication of the Phillips case. So not only was the religion not considered, it was disparaged and it was actually held against him. And I think those are the reasons why that decision was made. Do I see the Supreme Court taking it up again? This particular case, no, I don't think they would take up. Does it mean that other gay rights cases won't come before the court? It could, but I don't really look for anything that would be a sweeping change given the general spirit and feelings and beliefs of our country at this particular point in time. Okay, does anybody else have any questions at this point? I'm either doing an incredibly good job or you all are afraid that if you ask some questions that Pachy Mom will slap you with her trunk. So now let's talk a little bit about Trump's pick, Brett Kavanaugh. There are things to like and things to hate about his decisions. And I'm going to talk about a few of them here. On birth control, he argued that the mandate of birth control in Obamacare infringed on religious rights. And in that opinion, that's got the liberals all in an uproar because they're afraid that their precious birth control won't be paid for and mandated under Obamacare. So that's one of the things that they're going to use, and they're going to use to frighten everybody that, oh, you won't be able to have birth control anymore. The Supreme Court will rule it's illegal, and just like they will with abortion, and you won't be able to have anything, and you know, the world will just end as we know it, like the liberals typically do. Now the next thing is on Obamacare, and here's where the conservatives are going to be a little bit uneasy with him. The critics say that he laid the foundation for the argument that Obamacare could continue as a tax. Now, I'm no fan of Obamacare. Believe me, it has cost my family and extended family probably tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars because of the rulings and the things that they've done. However, I think it shows that Mr. Kavanaugh has a pretty good understanding of the law and the Constitution and figured out a way that at that particular point in time that it could be legal. I don't know if that's his belief that it should be legal, but he did supposedly help provide some of the framework for that. Now, we're not going to find a justice that's going to agree with each of us on every single position the way that we would like. But even if the person doesn't agree with us, I'm going to respect the fact that there was an issue, and as someone who was not on the Supreme Court at that time, he figured out a way to overcome the issue and find a way to make it work, even if it was something that I don't like. And the next time it may be something that I really like. So I can appreciate someone that knows the Constitution that well that he was able to figure out a way to do that. Now, one of the next things is a biggie, and it's one that I truly hate, and I think all of us that are listening and anybody who tunes in to listen is going to hate, and that's the collection of metadata. And what metadata is basically the government tapping into our cell phones and being able to take whatever they want from our cell phone conversations and tweets and instant messages. Brett Kavanaugh did reject a challenge for the warrantless connection of phone metadata. He felt that it was in the national best interest in order for various agencies to tap into these phones without warrants. I don't particularly agree with him, but then on the other hand, I'm not a SCOTUS pick. Now, another place that he did some very interesting opinion writing was in workers' rights. He wrote an opinion that employers can waive workers' rights to picket in arbitration agreements, which is kind of a blow against the union and the workers, and kind of a plus for employers. Now, how often that one will come up, I don't know, but it is interesting to note that he did side with employers at that part. On immigration, he kind of has a good stand on immigration. He did oppose special visas for Brazilian workers because at that point, the jobs that they were to fill, there were U.S. workers that were available to do that work. And I don't think we should just bring in immigrants to do jobs because they're there if there's U.S. workers that are available to do these jobs. Now, another thing that he did rule on, which I absolutely love, is he made a ruling in his court that voided a vote to form a union due to the union allowing illegal immigrants, though the article called it undocumented workers, but that's a whole nother subject. But it voided the vote for a union to form because it allowed illegal immigrants to vote in an election which actually tainted the election. So what he was saying is, if you don't have the legal right to be in the country and you don't have the legal right to work, you don't have the legal right to vote to form a union. So on that one, I'm 100% with him. On net neutrality, his stand on that is he considers it unlawful under the First Amendment, which I would agree with that. He has been critical of many of the EPA regulations that were added during the Obama era, and he also wrote an opinion declaring the Consumer Protection Bureau unconstitutional, which for those of us that are kind of aware of that, and for those of you who aren't, that's Senator Elizabeth Warren's brainchild. And what that was is anytime there was any illegal consumer things done by businesses or industry, they would be fined. The interesting little catch to that is all of the businesses and entities that were fined, all of those fines went into a nice little slush fund, which was then handed out to liberal left-wing leaning causes. So that's kind of nice to see that that one might be going away too. So that's kind of my little take on Diana Ross and the Supremes. So now I'd like to open it up to questions and see what you thought. And, you know, if you think I'm full of beans, you can tell me that. It won't hurt my feelings because I'll ignore it anyhow.
Hey, Pachy Dad, this is Kermit. I'm concerned, just like you, with the metadata thing big time. It's probably my biggest concern that I've heard so far. And I know Gorsuch is solid on that aspect of it. Is Kavanaugh, do you know if do you think he's considered, open to maybe changing his mind based on technology, or is he kind of maybe a closed-minded guy? I don't know much personally about him.
I think as more and more stuff has come out about the metadata and the way people feel about it, I think that's something that might be open for him to entertain changing his mind on that. But I did feel that it was fair to report that at the time when that was discussed, he did feel that warrantless searches were necessary.
When I was listening to Rush today, he did bring up net neutrality, and Kavanaugh did write a paper that the Supreme Court approved of and really liked, about how net neutrality went against the Constitution. It was completely unconstitutional. So he is solidly against net neutrality. And just based on that, I would think that he would be pretty solidly against the metadata collection as well. But I mean, that's just an assumption of mine.
I'm not sure on that one because those are two separate and distinct issues. I would hope that he would be open to reconsideration on that. And like I said, you know, we're not going to get 100% of everything that we want. And some people are saying, well, you know, Trump should have picked the most conservative he could get and, you know, just ram it down their throats. That would be nice, but that's not the way that Trump thinks. And he may have some good reasons for picking Brett Kavanaugh that we're not even aware of.
Yeah, I agreed. There's a whole lot more good than bad for sure. Just imagine what we would have had with a different president.
Oh, I don't even want to think about that. One of the mornings when I was relaxing just before work, they had Judge, why can't I think of his name? But they had the judge on, and he was talking about this pick, and he said, there's a little bit to like and a little bit to hate for everybody. And to me, I think that's a sign of a pretty good justice. I mean, yeah, we would like him to agree with us all the time, but I also want an independent thinker who can look at the Constitution for what's there and come up with a ruling that he feels follows the letter of the Constitution.
Well, it's just like any president, really. I mean, you know, there are going to be things, believe it or not, that Trump does somewhere along the way that we're not going to like as individuals. Nobody can always do everything the way everybody wants him to. I mean, Trump's a good example of that, obviously. There's nothing he does that the liberals agree with, and you know, probably nothing Hillary would have done would any of us have agreed with. And I think with a Supreme Court pick, it's even more so the case because they're determining the Constitution, and because he is the pick is a strict constitutionalist. I see that as a very positive thing.
Unfortunately, no matter who was picked and who was doing the picking, if it had been Hillary that had won the election and she made a pick for the Supreme Court, the conservatives would all be talking about how this is so far left, this pick, and you know, it's bordering on communism and socialism, because the arguments nowadays don't appear to be based on anything factual. It's how wild and outrageous you can make the person sound, which is kind of sad because you have these people that are of good character, that are good, decent human beings, that are being chewed up and spit out in these hearings just for the entertainment value of it by the opposing party. And much of what they're saying isn't even factual. You know, it'd be different if they were bringing up true facts about a person and it disparaged their character. But when you make something up and you start down that road, that's despicable. And whether it's the left or the right, nobody should be doing that.
Right, and it just makes people who are good people not even want to be involved with the process. Who wants to put their family through that kind of stuff?
Well, exactly. And in this case, they've got, like I said, two young daughters. I mean, they're both I would say probably under 13. So hopefully they will be considered off limits. But with Maxine Waters screaming and touting that they get in everybody's face, who knows? I mean, because the rhetoric that's been coming out of them since that has just been awful.
Well, Maxine Waters has her own special brand of awful, and I don't think there's anybody who outdoes awful like Maxine Waters. Well, this is about the end of my show, unless you all have any more questions. So I'll open it up for any last questions, and then I'll do a wrap-up. Okay. To wrap up my first show, I'd like to say what an honor and privilege it has been to do this show. I want to do a couple of shout outs. I want to do a shout out to Pachy Mom, who battled through doing the live stream and pulled her hair out and looked at every video I think there was on live streaming, and we finally figured out what we were doing, hopefully. I want to also do a shout out to Unirock. He was the one that kind of inspired me to try and do my own show and see what I could do with it. But most of all, I guess I want to thank all of you who are listening and who took the time to tune in, because you didn't know what it was going to be like, what I was going to say, how it was going to be. And I just want to let you know that I so much appreciate the opportunity to share what I did with you this evening. This is Pachy Dad, and I tell it like it is.
Thanks for joining us, everybody.